Hi there! I'm going to be doing a tutorial on alternating shell stitch edging. This is for crochet, and it looks like this one is finished. I like to use it for blankets where I use two colors. I think it turns out really nice. So I hope I make everything clear. This is my very first one. So here we go.
Okay, let's get started. Now, I usually end up with both colors of my yarn, and you're going to want to end up with them in the same vicinity of each other. And the first color, you're going to want it to start about 2 or 3 stitches in front of the second one. I've turned the blanket around because I kind of like having the darker color to the backs, but it can go either way. I'm using Yarn Bee Soft Secret yarn for this type of blanket. It's my favorite one for it, but I'm sure you can use anything you want, and I'm using a G-hook. Okay. And very important when you start, you always want to make sure for this particular project, you want to make sure that all of your yarn is coming to the front of your work. If it goes to the back, then it's not going to work out very well, and you'll see why as we get going. Okay. So we're going to start with the color that's farthest to the right, or if you're left-handed, then you're going to want to do it completely backwards to how I'm doing. So you start with the left. You're going to start with double crochet. You're going to do 7 double crochets into the stitch, into the last stitch that you did with your second color of yarn. Right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then skip 2 stitches, 1, 2, and then tack it down with a slip stitch in the 3rd stitch. So now, as you can see, our second color is coming out of the center of our last shell stitch. So making sure that your yarn from your previous shell stitch is all coming forward. We're going to pick up our second color and do the same thing. 7 double crochets in that last stitch where we did the slip stitch for the second color. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7. Skip 2 stitches, and in the 3rd we put a slip stitch. And making sure that all of our yarn is coming forward, we pick up the yarn from our previous stitch, which is in the center of our last shell stitch, and we repeat the process. Make sure your yarn's coming forward, 7 double crochets in that stitch where you did your slip stitch. Skip 2, and in the 3rd, we do our slip stitch. And I always like to make sure I have plenty of excess, because if you end up losing a stitch somewhere, ooh, it'd be a nightmare trying to put it back together. Okay. This is just ends from before. All of our yarn coming forward. Sometimes this can get a little tangled up, as I'm sure that you can already see. So sometimes you gotta take a minute and get your yarn straightened out. A little twisted here. Okay, and we repeat. Make sure all our yarn is forward. 7 double crochets in that slip stitch, or in the same stitch where you slip stitch from before with your other color. And then we skip 2, 1, 2, 3. And number 3, we put our slip stitch. So you see how pretty that is. I love it. And you just do that all the way around. I continue to do this I continue the same way even over the edges. It doesn't seem to make a difference. I don't do anything different for the corners. That's what I meant, the corners. Just keep going all the way around to the end, and we'll meet back here and I'll show you how to finish up. Okay, here we are at the end, and your very last shell stitch, which we are about to do, should of course line up with your pattern. So I've got gray here, and I've got gray here, and this one's the second to last, so I'm going to want to make sure that this very last stitch is pink. What I had to do in order to make that happen was I actually had to change up how many stitches I was skipping before in between the 7 double crochets and the slip stitch, because I ended up not having the right amount of stitches in order to make it look uniform. So I went back 3 shells, and instead of skipping 2 stitches, I skipped 3, and then in the 4th stitch I did my slip stitch for each one of these last 3 stitches. And it's not going to look any different from the rest of your pattern. It's just I had to skip that one extra one per shell stitch in order to make sure that it was completely uniform all the way around the blanket. And I hope that makes sense. Okay, here we go for our last stitch, and I'll show you how we make it all look pretty like we were never here. Okay. Well, this second to last shell stitch, you want to make sure that you do your slip stitch in the same stitch as where you started your first set of double crochet. Now, what we're going to do, I've got all 7, we're going to go behind this very first set. We're going to find that middle stitch where all these 7 double crochets join into, and I think that's part of the blanket. Okay, so we go in here, into the middle, grab our yarn, and make our slip stitch. And pull it up. Bam! Check that out. So you see, once we get all these ends woven in, it's like we were never here. How pretty. Well, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you understood everything. It's my very first crochet tutorial, so I hope everybody likes it. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me, comment below, whatever. So, thanks a bunch!